Insider leaked the moment Meghan Markle realized Prince Harry wasn't just casually scrolling, he was quietly spiraling over another woman's life, and not just any woman but Chelsy Davy. That's when everything behind closed doors reportedly snapped. Because this wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic at first, it was subtle, too subtle. The kind of tension that creeps into a room and sits there, uninvited, unspoken, but impossible to ignore. It starts with something small, a phone screen lighting up late at night, a pause that lasts just a little too long, a scroll that doesn't end when it should. And according to people who have been watching closely, not publicly but quietly, from the inside, that's exactly where the shift began. Because when Chelsy welcomed her third baby, it didn't just trend online, it hit somewhere deeper. Not like a headline, like a memory, like a mirror. And suddenly, what looked like just another update turned into something personal. Because years ago, long before the cameras, long before the titles became complicated, long before the interviews and the exits and the statements, there was a version of Harry that talked about something very different, a bigger family, a quieter life, something grounded, something normal. And that version of the future didn't include chaos. And now, according to whispers building behind the scenes, he's watching that exact life play out, but not with him in it. And that's where Meghan reportedly stepped in. Not immediately, not dramatically, but sharply, because at first it wasn't obvious what was happening. It just felt off, a change in energy, a distance that wasn't there before, conversations that started but didn't finish, moments that felt disconnected. And then came the moment that insiders claim changed everything. A confrontation, not explosive, not screaming, but controlled, focused, direct. The kind of confrontation where the words aren't loud, but they land harder. Because reportedly, Meghan didn't ask casually. She didn't hint. She didn't circle around it. She went straight to the point. Why are you so focused on her life? And that question didn't come out of nowhere. It came after patterns, repeated ones, the same name coming up too often, the same silence whenever certain topics appeared, the same distant look, not angry, not sad, but somewhere else entirely. And what made it worse wasn't just the focus, it was the contrast. Because on one side, there's a life that looks simple, 3 kids, a private routine, no constant spotlight, no pressure to perform, no headlines dissecting every move. And on the other side, there's pressure, expectation, public scrutiny, a life that never fully turns off. And insiders say that contrast didn't just stay in Harry's head. It started leaking into real conversations. Small comments at first. What if things had been different? Do you ever think about how things could have gone? Questions that sound harmless until they're not. Because once those questions start appearing, they don't stay questions. They turn into something heavier. And that's when Meghan reportedly drew a line. Because from her perspective, this wasn't about the past. It was about the present, about what was happening right now, about the fact that instead of moving forward, something or someone was pulling him backwards, and she wasn't going to ignore it. Now, here's where it gets even more uncomfortable, because people close to the situation say this isn't just about nostalgia. It's not just about looking back and wondering what if. It's about something deeper, regret, the kind that doesn't show up all at once, but builds slowly, quietly, until one day it's impossible to ignore. Because the truth is, that relationship wasn't simple. It wasn't clean. It was messy, on and off, complicated, but it was real. And sometimes the real ones don't fade easily, especially when you start seeing what that life could have become. And right now, that life looks complete, stable, peaceful, and completely out of reach. And according to insiders, that realization didn't just sit quietly. It started affecting behavior, moments of withdrawal, less engagement, a noticeable shift in presence, like he's physically there but mentally somewhere else. And Meghan noticed. Of course she did, because you don't miss something like that when it's happening right in front of you. And this is where the situation reportedly took a sharper turn, because instead of brushing it off, instead of pretending everything was fine, Meghan reportedly confronted it head on. Not just the behavior, but the meaning behind it. What are you really thinking? And that question didn't have an easy answer, because how do you explain something like that without making it worse? How do you admit that something from your past is starting to feel unfinished? That maybe, just maybe, you're seeing a version of your life that you once wanted and realizing you don't have it anymore. That's not a simple conversation. That's not something you can just smooth over. And insiders say it didn't get smoothed over. It lingered. It sat there, unresolved, because once something like that is said out loud, you can't take it back. And suddenly, the atmosphere changes. The silence gets heavier. The distance becomes noticeable. And everything that used to feel natural starts feeling forced. And here's the part that people aren't saying loudly, but they're definitely thinking. This isn't just about one moment. It's about a pattern. Because when someone starts looking backwards consistently, intensely, it raises a bigger question. What are they not finding in the present? And that's where things reportedly started getting complicated. Because now it's not just about Chelsy. It's about what she represents. A different path, a different outcome, a different version of everything. And that's a dangerous comparison to have inside a marriage, because once that comparison exists, it doesn't just disappear. It grows quietly, slowly, but steadily. And according to insiders, that growth is exactly what triggered the confrontation in the first place. Because Meghan didn't just see the behavior, she saw where it was heading, and she wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. Not when it felt this real. Not when it felt this close to the surface. And now everything is sitting in that tension, unspoken but understood. And the real question is no longer what happened, it's what happens next. And now the situation doesn't feel like a passing phase anymore. It feels like something that has settled in, something that is quietly reshaping everything from the inside out. Because once that confrontation happened, once those words were said out loud, nothing could go back to how it was before. And insiders are saying that what followed wasn't an explosion, it was something far more unsettling. A slow, controlled shift where every interaction started carrying weight, every silence started meaning something, and every glance felt loaded with unspoken thoughts that neither of them could fully address without opening something much bigger than either of them was ready to handle. Because after that moment, after Meghan directly confronted the issue, there was reportedly a change in how Harry responded to everything around him, not just to her, but to the environment itself. Like he became more guarded, more careful with his words, more aware of how everything could be interpreted, but at the same time, more distant, like a part of him had quietly stepped back. And that's the kind of shift that doesn't go unnoticed, especially not in a relationship where every small detail is already under pressure from the outside world. And here's where things take another complicated turn, because according to people who have been observing closely, Meghan didn't just stop at that one confrontation. She reportedly started paying closer attention to patterns that she might have overlooked before, things that didn't seem important on their own, but when put together started forming a picture that was hard to ignore. Moments where Harry seemed distracted during conversations, moments where he disengaged emotionally at times when connection was expected, moments where he seemed more reflective than present. And that reflection wasn't neutral. It had direction. It had focus. And that focus kept circling back to the same place. And the problem with that kind of situation is that it creates a silent tension that keeps building even when nothing is being said. Because both people become aware of it, both people feel it, but neither can fully resolve it without forcing a conversation that could push things into a space that's even harder to navigate. And insiders say that's exactly what started happening. Conversations that began normally but slowly drifted into uncomfortable territory, subtle remarks that carried more meaning than they appear to on the surface, and a growing sense that something fundamental was shifting beneath everything. Because when Meghan reportedly pushed further, when she started asking not just what was happening, but why it was happening, the answers didn't come easily, and that's where the real tension began to show. Because it's one thing to acknowledge behavior, but it's another thing entirely to explain the feeling behind it, especially when that feeling involves something unresolved from the past that has suddenly become very real again in the present. And insiders suggest that at some point, the conversation moved beyond just curiosity or concern and into something more direct, more uncomfortable, where Meghan reportedly questioned whether this wasn't just a passing reaction, but something deeper, something that had been sitting under the surface for a long time and was now being triggered in a way that couldn't be ignored anymore. And that kind of question doesn't just stay in the moment, it lingers, it echoes, it forces both sides to think about things they might have avoided thinking about before. Because once you start asking whether someone is emotionally connected to a version of their past, you're no longer talking about a single situation, you're talking about the foundation of what's happening in the present, and that's where things reportedly became even more complicated. Because from Harry's side, according to whispers, there wasn't a clear denial, but there also wasn't a clear explanation, just a kind of hesitation, a pause that said more than words could, and in situations like that, silence doesn't calm things down, it makes them louder. And now now everything is being interpreted differently. Every action, every reaction, every moment of distance, because once doubt enters the picture, it changes how everything is seen. An insider said that's exactly what Meghan is now dealing with. Not just a specific concern, but an ongoing awareness that something isn't aligning the way it should, and that awareness doesn't switch off, it stays active, it keeps analyzing, it keeps questioning, it keeps searching for clarity that isn't coming easily. And at the same time, there's another layer to this that makes everything even more intense, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is happening in a life that is already under constant observation, where every public appearance, every interaction, every subtle expression can be picked apart and turned into speculation. And that external pressure only amplifies what's happening internally, because now it's not just about what they're dealing with privately, it's about how that private tension might start showing in ways that can't be controlled. And according to people watching closely, those signs are already starting to appear in small ways. Moments where the energy feels slightly off, moments where the connection doesn't look as effortless as it once did, moments where something feels just a little bit out of sync. And while those moments might seem minor on their own, when placed in the context of everything that's been building, they start to carry a different meaning, a meaning that points towards something shifting beneath the surface. Because here's the reality that insiders are quietly circling around without saying it outright. Once a situation like this reaches this point, it doesn't resolve quickly. It doesn't disappear overnight. It either gets addressed fully or it continues to grow in the background, shaping everything in ways that become harder to ignore over time. And right now, according to what's being whispered, it hasn't been fully addressed. It's still there, still unresolved, still influencing how everything is unfolding. And that's what makes this moment feel so uncertain, because it's not about a clear outcome yet, it's about a direction. And that direction is still being decided in real time, depending on what happens next, depending on whether the tension is confronted again or allowed to settle into something quieter but more permanent. And that's where the real question now sits, not in the past, not in what triggered this, but in how it's going to shape everything moving forward. Because at the end of all of this, what started as a reaction to someone else's life has turned into something that is now directly affecting their own. And that kind of shift doesn't stay contained. It spreads, it influences decisions, it changes dynamics, it forces conversations that might not have happened otherwise. And insiders say that right now they are standing in the middle of that shift, not at the beginning anymore, but not yet at the outcome either. And that's why this situation feels different, because it's no longer just about speculation or surface level tension. It's about something deeper that has been acknowledged, something that has been confronted, and something that is now waiting to be resolved one way or another. And until that happens, everything remains in that uncertain space where nothing is fully broken, but nothing feels completely stable either. And sometimes that space is where the biggest changes begin.